Hundreds of security personnel were reportedly also killed. We have indications that the security forces made mass arrests in several cities, even pursuing injured people into hospitals and detaining lawyers, human rights defenders, activists, and ordinary civilians. The Tehran prosecutor's office has reportedly opened criminal cases against athletes, actors, people involved in the movie industry, and the owners of cafes on charges of supporting the protests. And in a chilling development, the chief of the judiciary said earlier this week that their work had just started and there would be no leniency for those detained. Worryingly, Iran remains among the top executioner states in the world. In 2025, at least 1,500 people were reportedly executed, a 50% increase on the previous year. I'm deeply concerned by contradictory statements from the Iranian authorities about whether those detained in connection with the protests may be executed. While the foreign minister said executions were not under consideration, senior judicial officials continued to threaten protesters with charges that carry a mandatory death sentence. The broadcast by state media of nearly 100 forced confessions by those detained and a lack of transparency around proceedings raise grave concerns over the rights to due process and fair trial. Reports indicate that detainees are unable to communicate with their families or legal representatives due to the communications and internet shutdowns. This shutdown, the longest recorded in Iran, has severely restricted access to information and communication. Iranians have been unable to speak to each other or to people outside the country and unable to find out what is happening around them. The Iranian authorities have sought to delegitimize the protesters by labeling them terrorists, enemies of the state, and foreign agents. They accused rioters of infiltrating peaceful protests to attack security officers and public property. None of this would justify the resort to excessive, unnecessary, and disproportionate use of force or reduce the government's obligations to ensure due process and transparent investigations. Distinguished delegates, these protests are the latest in a long line of heartfelt calls by the Iranian people for change. And the crackdown is the latest in a long line of violent repression by the Iranian authorities, most recently in 2022, following the death in custody of Gina Massa Amini. This council mandated the fact-finding mission on Iran after that convulsion of violence. The recent protests were sparked by soaring prices against the backdrop of a serious economic crisis compounded by government policies and the impact of foreign sanctions. They then evolved into sustained demands for political, social, and economic reforms. The authorities initially responded with a call for dialogue and announced the doubling of a state subsidy to mitigate rising prices. Tragically, this quickly gave way to the old pattern of killings and arrests, a pattern of subjugation and overwhelming force that can never address people's grievances and frustrations. The only way out of this frightening escalation is through dialogue based on the human rights of all Iranians. The aspirations and ideas, in particular of women, girls, young people, and ethnic and religious minorities, must be allowed to shape Iran's future. We remain available to support any change in direction that fully respects Iran's human rights obligations. Distinguished delegates, I have 7 messages for the top leadership in Iran. They are intended as an appeal to find a solution to the current crisis and as a way forward for the people of Iran. I call on the Iranian authorities to reconsider, to pull back, and to end their brutal repression, including summary trials and disproportionate sentences. I call for the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained by the Iranian authorities. And I call for a complete moratorium on the death penalty. I urge the government to end the internet and communications shutdown and to stop using this as a systematic practice. I call for accountability. Long-standing impunity for past human rights violations is fueling grievance and tension in Iran. I therefore urge independent investigations into all human rights violations consistent with international standards. And I call on the authorities to initiate reforms that include steps to rebuild trust and repair the social contract. I also urge them to engage with the international human rights ecosystem by cooperating meaningfully with my office, with the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission and the Special Rapporteur. This includes allowing full access to the country. Beyond Iran, I urge the international community to take immediate steps to address the impact of sanctions on the human rights of the Iranian people. Aggressive rhetoric and threats are deeply counterproductive. Accountability for human rights violations cannot be achieved by military force coming from inside or outside Iran. It is imperative to reduce tensions across the region. Human rights are an essential tool to navigate through difficult issues and troubled times, not a weapon to be instrumentalized against anyone. My most fervent wish is for this crisis to become a turning point for change that puts the rights, aspirations, and needs of the Iranian people first. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Alto Comisionado.
Thank you, High Commissioner. I now wish to give the floor to my Sato, Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran and on behalf of the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures. You have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates and representative of civil society, it is my honor to address you today on behalf of the Coordination Committee of the Special Procedures and on behalf of my mandate. On December 28th, severe economic hardship ignited demonstrations across Iran that became a nationwide movement spanning all regions, with men, women from diverse ethnic and religious groups demanding political change. What distinguishes democratic governance from authoritarian rule is that people can exercise their right to peacefully demand change, and authorities must engage with these demands rather than to suppress them. The situation deteriorated dramatically on the 8th of January. On this day, authorities implemented a near-total telecommunications shutdown. The ongoing internet shutdown prevents international witnessing of atrocities while disrupting peaceful protest coordination. This digital siege has caused immense anguish for families inside and outside of Iran, unable to confirm their loved ones' safety. The death toll remains contested due to the shutdown, enabling the state to control information flow. Authorities have reported over 3,000 deaths, including security forces, while some civil society estimates go up to tens of thousands. Though neither of these figures can be independently verified, the staggering discrepancy demonstrates how the shutdown has obscured the true scale of events. I've also received disturbing reports of authorities coercing families to falsely claim deceased relatives were Basij members allegedly killed by protesters, as well as forcing payments for body retrieval. If true, these are cruel practices that compound grief with extortion. Mr. President, the rhetoric of labeling peaceful protesters as terrorists, rioters, or mercenaries, the same narrative deployed during the 2022 protest, seeks to justify brutal crackdowns and ignores this uprising's domestic organic nature. The Supreme Leader and the President have called for harsh action, and the head of the judiciary demanding swift prosecutions without leniency. Lethal forces by authorities can only be used as last resort to protect life and must be lawful, necessary, and proportionate. I have received countless videos capturing what appears to be the use of lethal force by security forces against unarmed protesters in violation of these principles. Tens of thousands of individuals, including school children, have reportedly been detained nationwide without legal counsel or family contact, with raids also conducted in hospitals. I've received information of detainees being coerced into making false confessions broadcast on television, reinforcing the state's narrative that protesters are dangerous criminals. Civic space has faced further restrictions, including media closures and intimidation of lawyers, journalists, and activists. The crackdown may soon extend to economic persecution, with proposals to confiscate assets of celebrities and business owners for supporting the protest. The scale of repression we are seeing today is among the most severe in its brutality and in scope in its recent history. Mr. President, now is the time for the international community to respond and to support the people of Iran in their pursuit for fundamental rights and accountability. As Special Rapporteur, I will, in coordination with OHCHR and the fact-finding mission, to continue monitoring the situation and to provide an update on the overall human rights situation at the next Council session. It's important to keep in mind that these protest-related violations occur within the context of Iran's broader human rights situation. For example, executions for homicides, drug-related offenses, and espionage have continued during the protest. Accordingly, I reiterate my request for a country visit. Mr. President, I am deeply concerned by the current situation and stress the need for thorough, independent investigation, including potential violations of international human rights law and international criminal law. I respectfully urge this Council to empower the fact-finding mission to investigate these protest-related violations to ensure transparency and accountability. The Iranian people have shown extraordinary courage in speaking truth to power. Now, the international community must respond with the urgency and commitment this situation demands. Thank you.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur. I will now give the floor to Sara Hossain, Chair of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the Islamic Republic of Iran, for a video message.
High Commissioner, Excellencies and colleagues. We have witnessed unprecedented levels of violence in the Islamic Republic of Iran in the past 3 weeks, marking what appears to be the deadliest crackdown against its people since the revolution of 1979. The protest that started on 28th December, sparked by an economic crisis and deteriorating living conditions, quickly spread to all 31 of Iran's provinces. After the government initially adopted a conciliatory tone, the state response appears to have devolved into increasing violence. The fact-finding mission on Iran has been interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence. What we can already see is deeply troubling. The information we have gathered points to severe human rights violations, including disproportionate use of force resulting in arbitrary killings and injuries, torture, sexual violence, arbitrary arrests and detentions, and forced confessions. The government of Iran has briefed the mission on the situation and provided reports with its perspective on the events, including allegations of external interference. In this regard, we underscore that threats or acts of unilateral military intervention by third states are clearly contrary to international law. Further, noting allegations of severe double standards in the application of international law, we reiterate that these do not absolve any state of its obligation to respect, protect, and ensure the enjoyment of human rights. The government of Iran has till now avoided an open account of the crisis, including by imposing a complete shutdown of the internet and mobile services since the 8th of January, which remains in place till now. Reports suggest that beginning that night and through the following days, security forces in Iran unleashed extensive and ferocious lethal force against protesters, including with assault rifles and heavy machine guns, leading to a staggering number of deaths. The government has itself acknowledged thousands of deaths, and credible information suggests the number is much higher. Physicians have reported hospitals overwhelmed with mass casualty conditions. We've been haunted by images of grieving relatives at the makeshift Karizak morgue in Tehran city, searching for their loved ones' corpses amongst what appear to be hundreds of body bags piled one on top of another. The government claims that at least 300 members of its security forces were amongst those killed, that relief workers and medical personnel were attacked, and public and private property, including healthcare facilities, damaged. Video footage which we've reviewed appears to show some individuals burning vehicles and buildings. But as you will recall, international human rights law imposes extremely strict criteria for the use of lethal force by law enforcement. Intentional lethal force may only be used when it is strictly unavoidable to protect life against an imminent threat. Despite the communications blackout, the mission has collected witness and victim accounts and assessed digital material which appears to show security forces firing lethal ammunition into crowds that did not present an imminent threat to life. Information received also indicates that thousands of people were injured. This includes by metal pellets reportedly fired deliberately into victims' faces, creating horrific injuries, and recalling the pattern of blinding protesters we saw during the 2022 protests. On 10th January alone, approximately 500 protesters with pellet injuries to their eyes appear to have been admitted to one hospital in Isfahan. Around 24,000 protesters appear to have been detained, including children, journalists, and human rights defenders, and nearly 100 confessions have been broadcast on state television, with most apparently forced. The judiciary has urged punishment for detained protesters, quote, as quickly as possible, without leniency, unquote, and threatened to prosecute, quote, rioters, unquote, for morabe, the offense of enmity against God, which carries the death penalty. Excellencies, when we view these recent protests alongside established historic patterns of violations identified in relation to the Women Life Freedom protests, it is clear that there is an urgent need to act. The violations we have seen do not appear to be sporadic events, but widespread across the country and imposed in an organized manner. We must gather evidence and establish whether human rights violations and crimes under international law have occurred. Perpetrators and the state structures enabling the violence we have seen must be identified and held to account, and victims must receive urgent assistance and protection. It is only through accountability and breaking the cycle of impunity that such abuses can be prevented from occurring again. Recent events underline how critical it is for this cycle to be halted to prevent further escalation and more irreparable harm. International law demands that we take action to end the violations, protect those at risk, and forge a real path to truth, justice, and accountability for women, men, and children in Iran. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I will now call on Mr. Payam Akhavan, Professor at the University of Toronto. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, distinguished delegates, the people of Iran are living through a nightmare. Allow me to share the story of a family who spent 3 days searching for their son. He had left home to protest in the streets of Tehran, but never returned. In distress, his parents first searched the hospitals where many of the wounded have been abducted and killed. Having failed to find him, they went next to the notorious morgue in Kahrizak. They searched among countless bodies in black plastic bags, mutilated by bullet wounds, unceremoniously dumped on the floor like piles of garbage. Grieving families wanting to retrieve the bodies are told to pay exorbitant sums of money for the bullets used to kill their loved ones. Yet others are forced to sign confessions blaming imaginary terrorists for the murder of their children. Hope and horror were intertwined as the parents opened the black bags one by one. Their search was not in vain. They found their son still alive. He had miraculously survived severe bullet wounds, lying motionless inside the body bag for 3 days, pretending to be dead to avoid execution by a finishing shot to the head. Just imagine the relief that mother and father must have felt. But for most, there is no such miracle. The search ends in devastating grief. These are the scenes from hell confronting countless Iranians today. Mr. President, even against the blood-stained record of the Islamic Republic, extensively documented by the UN, the savagery of the past days is unprecedented. The authorities initially claimed that 5,000 had been killed, but reduced the figure to 3,000 2 days ago. This is a gross underestimate. 5 days ago, a report by medical doctors inside Iran put the number at 16,500 killed and 330,000 injured. The number increases each day because the killings haven't stopped. We may not know the exact number because of the internet blackout, but by any plausible estimate, this is the worst mass murder in the contemporary history of Iran. Our beautiful country has become a cemetery in which the hopes of our youth are buried. I began my career as a UN human rights officer here in Geneva in 1993 during the war in the former Yugoslavia. I went on to serve as a prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague. I helped draft the indictment for the Srebrenica genocide, in which some 8,000 Bosnian Muslims were massacred during July of 1995. By comparison, at least twice that number has been killed in Iran in half the time. This is an extermination. And unlike Bosnia, there is no war between military forces. There is only a war by the Islamic Republic against unarmed youth crying for a better future. Mr. President, the Iranian people look to this Council for justice. It is imperative to ensure that the international independent fact-finding mission has sufficient resources for its investigative function to preserve and collate the massive amounts of evidence to facilitate accountability. The Islamic Republic, of course, is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The Security Council should be asked to make a Chapter 7 referral, even if it is unlikely to do so because of its cynical politics. We persist, however, in the hope that one day, in the not-too-distant future, in a democratic Iran, those most responsible for these crimes against humanity will be prosecuted before an independent and impartial special court. We have no doubt that Iran, too, will have its Nuremberg moment. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, attempts to portray these protests among millions as a foreign conspiracy is an insult to the memory of those who have sacrificed their lives for freedom. The Iranian people are heir to a rich and ancient civilization. Theirs is the heritage of Cyrus the Great, the author of the first human rights declaration from 2,500 years ago, and the cuneiform alphabet of the clay cylinder that is today housed in the British Museum. Theirs is the poetry of Sa'di of Shiraz, whose words adorn the UN headquarters in New York. Human beings are members of a whole, he reminds us, in creation of one essence and soul. Our collective pain and suffering has brought us ever closer together in a profound shared humanity. It has only increased our determination to put an end to this nightmare. Like our ancestors, we persist in the belief that in the end, light will triumph over the darkness. The day will come when we will dance in the streets and celebrate our freedom. And when that day comes, we will remember those who stood with us in our hour of need. Thank you.
Le agradezco esta declaración.
Thank you for your statement. In keeping with practice, we shall now hear the concerned country. I recognize the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. You have 5 minutes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. Vice President, distinguished members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Republic of Iran addresses this special session with utmost clarity and resolve. We are here to state facts and to defend our people. The sponsors of this session and its outcome have never genuinely cared for the human rights of Iranians. Otherwise, they would have not imposed inhuman sanctions, violating the basic rights of every Iranian. Nor would they have supported Israel's war of aggression that killed and injured over 5,000 Iranians, dismissively referred to as their dirty job. The presence of an individual on this panel who is funded by the US Department of State and who has no affinity or alignment whatsoever with the Iranian people is in itself a telling indication of the bitter reality that this meeting serves merely as a pressure tool against Iran. Mr. Vice President, as the protests started on 28 December 2025, Iran fully recognized the right of people for peaceful protest and conducted negotiation channels with protesters. However, during the second phase, from 8 to 10 January, events were deliberately transformed into organized violence, including terrorist attacks, destruction of property, and armed actions against civilians and law enforcement. The government of Iran officially announced verified figures regarding the recent unrest. A total of 3,117 lives were lost, of which 2,427 were killed as a direct result of terrorist operations. These figures are the product of national investigation, legal documentation, and institutional accountability. Unlike those who selectively mourn victims for political convenience, Iran neither hides its dead nor outsources grief. We remain the principal claimant of justice and the sole authority pursuing accountability. Accordingly, the Islamic Republic of Iran does not recognize the legitimacy or validity of this special session and its subsequent resolution. Iran possesses independent national mechanisms for investigating and ensuring accountability for acts of violence and terrorism. Yesterday, the President Pezeshkian announced publicly that he has assigned various groups to carefully examine the causes and contributing factors of these incidents so that the root causes of violence can be identified and eliminated. He reiterated that protest is a natural right of citizens, and the government considers itself obliged to listen to the voice of the people. The legal status of all detainees will be reviewed strictly in accordance with due process. Those found guilty of offenses related to the riots will face full legal accountability, with proceedings conducted in respect of internationally recognized standards and safeguards, guaranteeing fairness, impartiality, and transparency. Mr. Vice President, dear colleagues, Iranian nation with a civilization spanning 2,500 years has never accepted domination or colonial rule. History has proven repeatedly that Iran neither submits to foreign pressure nor tolerates covert aggression disguised as concern. The Iranian nation has endured wars, sanctions, terrorism, and relentless pressure, yet it stands united. This resilience is not accidental. It is the product of history, identity, the collective memory. Nations rooted in civilization do not collapse under noise, nor do they bend before hypocrisy. It is deeply ironic that states whose historical records are stained with war crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and systemic violence, even against their own population, now attempt to lecture Iran on social governance and human rights. Such posturing devices deceives no one, particularly at a time when their complicity in ongoing atrocities and genocide is evident and documented. I thank you all.
Thank you for your statement. And we can now begin with the list of speakers. Allow me to remind you of the time limit of 2 minutes 30 seconds for council members and 1 minute 30 seconds for observers, state observers and other observers. In 15 minutes, the list of speakers will close. I will have to interrupt you and apologize in advance. We can now start with the list of speakers for council members, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iceland on behalf of a group of 5 countries. Ms. Bogerud Katrin Ustgautu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iceland, has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This statement is on behalf of North Macedonia, Moldova, the United Kingdom, Germany, and my country, Iceland. Once again, the people of Iran have taken to the streets to demand a better life for themselves and their loved ones. In doing so, they are exercising their rights to freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly and of association and nothing more. We must, once again, the Iranian authorities have responded in a brutal and in a violent way, leaving thousands dead and many more injured and arbitrarily arrested. It is the obligations of states to uphold the human rights of their citizens, but when a government itself becomes the perpetrators of violations, it is our collective responsibility to act. This Council and the world cannot look away. Violence against peaceful protesters and mass killings must stop. The fact-finding mission is the only independent mechanism collecting and preserving evidence to ensure accountability. With the people of Iran being increasingly cut off from the outside world through internet and communication closures, this task is even more urgent. We must stand firmly with the people of Iran. So I therefore urge all the Council members to support the adoption of today's resolution. We owe it to the brave people of Iran, peacefully demanding dignity, justice and freedom. I thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora ministra.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I now give the floor to Estonia, who will be submitting a video statement on behalf of a group of countries.
President, I had the honor to speak on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states. We express our solidarity with the people of Iran in their calls for promotion and protection of their human rights. We strongly condemn the human rights violations committed by the Iranian authorities since 28 December, including killings of protesters, use of violence, repression, arbitrary detention, and use of intimidation tactics. The shutdown of internet has provided cover for a crackdown on peaceful demonstrations. It limits documentation of human rights violations and disrupts emergency and life-saving services. This makes the work of the Special Rapporteur and the fact-finding mission on Iran more important. The killing of demonstrators must stop. We strongly urge Iranian authorities to immediately halt all forms of violence and repression against peaceful protesters. All individuals arbitrarily detained must be released immediately. The threat of summary and arbitrary executions must end. We call on Iranians to fully uphold the right to freedom of expression and right to information, including by restoring full access to the internet and communication services for all. All human rights violations must be investigated in line with international human rights law, and those responsible held to account. We also support the adoption of the draft resolution and the renewal of the mandates there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the EU on behalf of a group of countries.
High Commissioner, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Liechtenstein align themselves with this statement. The European Union stands in solidarity with the Iranian people who have voiced their legitimate aspirations for a better life, freedom and dignity. We strongly condemn the brutal repression of peaceful protests across Iran, which resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians. We also condemn the reported widespread arbitrary arrests and detentions. Such gross violations and abuses must immediately stop. The European Union urges Iranian authorities to fully adhere to Iran's international obligations and fully uphold international law. All individuals arbitrarily detained must be released immediately. The EU strongly condemns any use of the death penalty to suppress internal dissent. The nationwide communications blackout is unacceptable. We urge Iranian authorities to restore all communications. There must be accountability for the dire events of the past weeks, and justice must be done for all those who were killed, injured, or detained only for exercising their human rights and for voicing legitimate demands. The EU fully supports the renewal of the mandates of the fact-finding mission and of the Special Rapporteur. It is paramount to end the cycle of systemic impunity for gross human rights violations carried out by state officials. The EU and its member states are exploring various tools to respond to the situation and support the Iranian people. The EU has taken targeted, restrictive measures against individuals and entities responsible for serious human rights violations in Iran. We will take further measures to target those responsible for the ongoing human rights violations and the repressions. We extend our full support to civil society and human rights defenders who are playing a crucial role. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. North Macedonia aligns itself with the statement of Iceland on behalf of the core group and the statement of the European Union delivered just a moment ago. In our national capacity, we thank the High Commissioner for Human Rights for his statement and assessment of the overall human rights situation in Iran. We reiterate our appreciation for the work of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran and the fact-finding mechanism, and we support the continuation of their mandates. Furthermore, we express grave concern over the continued deterioration of human rights in Iran in the context of recent nationwide protests. Credible reports of violent repression of peaceful demonstrations, including excessive use of force, arbitrary arrests and detentions, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, and executions constitute serious violation of international human rights law. We are particularly alarmed by reports of unlawful killings of protesters, including children, and by the targeting of women and girls for exercising their fundamental rights and freedoms, intimidation of victims' families, enforced disappearances, and the silencing of civil society, journalists and human rights defenders further aggravate the situation. For we strongly condemn prolonged internet shutdowns and communication restrictions that undermine freedom of expression and access to information. We call on the Iranian authorities to immediately cease violence against peaceful protesters and arbitrary detention and executions, restore full internet access, and respect the right of freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. Also, ensuring accountability remains essential to prevent further violations and impunity. For those reasons, North Macedonia calls upon all members of the Human Rights Council to lend their valuable support for the draft resolution tabled at this session. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Slovenia aligns itself with the EU statement. We are closely following developments in Iran, in particular on the recent violent suppression of protests and disproportionate use of force against peaceful protesters across the country. Slovenia expresses deep concern at the violence by Iranian security forces against protesters across Iran and credible reports of mass killings and arbitrary arrests, intimidation by security forces and detentions. Slovenia condemns the use of force and intimidation of individuals exercising their rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, and stresses that such practices are unacceptable. We are also concerned about reports regarding rash trials of peaceful protesters who could face harsh punishments, including the death penalty, which are used by Iranian authorities as a tool of state intimidation. It is important to mention that severe restrictions on communications, including unrestricted access to the Internet and communication services, may have concealed the true scale of human rights violations. Slovenia expects the free flow of information to be guaranteed. We again call on the Iranian authorities to immediately cease violence against peaceful protesters, to respect their international obligations, and to ensure the protection of freedom of expression and assembly, as well as accountability for human rights violations. We reiterate the importance of restraint, dialogue, and diplomacy in ensuring sustainable peace and stability in Iran and the wider region. We call on Iranian authorities to cooperate fully with the UN Human Rights Council, its mandated investigations and special procedures, as well as with UN High Commissioner on Human Rights and his office. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain. Thank you very much, Vice President. Spain welcomes this holding of a special session on the worrying human rights situation in Iran, and where we agreed with its convening. We condemn all violence exercised against peaceful demonstrators in Iran, and we urge the authorities in the country to guarantee freedom of expression and peaceful demonstrations. These are public freedoms and they're universal rights that are pillars of any prosperous and peaceful societies. The arbitrary detentions of thousands of peaceful demonstrators and extrajudicial sentences are serious violations of international human rights law. We request that the Iranian authorities put an end to repression, to arbitrary detention, and that they suspend all summary execution sentences of demonstrators. The death penalty is a cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment which is contrary to human dignity and which should never be used to put an end to legitimate demonstrations of the citizenry. We also call on the Iranian authorities to lift immediately all restrictions on communications and to ensure the right of all citizens to free access to information. We believe there must be transparency as to the number of victims, and that the families of those who have died must know the whereabouts of their loved ones. Spain reiterates that the use of force cannot substitute dialogue in order to tackle pending matters in Iran, both externally and internally. Violence only leads to greater instability in Iran and in the whole region. We believe in multilateral cooperation and unconditional support for international law, and therefore Spain will continue to defend the rights of Iranians and condemn violence against them. Thank you.
La representación de Irak.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We would like to reiterate that human rights are universal, indivisible, and complementary. We must deal with all human rights on an equal footing and with the same attention. The work of the Human Rights Council must be guided by the purposes and objectives of the Charter and human rights. It must be objective, non-selective. We must refrain from politicization and double standards. We reiterate the importance of having the language of dialogue in order to achieve peace and to have friendly relations between nations based on equality and rights. This enhances international cooperation. Iraq calls on all countries countries to work on enhancing human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, using dialogue, avoiding escalation, and to settle disputes in a peaceful manner in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. I give the floor to the distinguished Ambassador of France.
Merci.
Thank you, Vice President. France aligns itself with a statement made by the European Union. When we see unleashing violence, which is unprecedented in Iran, we express our full solidarity with the Iranian people, who for several weeks have been peacefully demonstrating to express their legitimate expectations of dignity, liberty, and the improvement in their standard of living. France believes that there has been arbitrary use of force by the Iranian authorities. There's been detaining of demonstrators, and there's been an internet shutdown in order to bring about silence and stifle voices that are urging for an end of repression. We believe there must be the freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly, including for young people, and there must be a re-establishment of internet connections. We stand alongside the Iranian people, and we ask that light be shone on this brutal repression and that justice be delivered for thousands of victims. We call for the immediate liberation of everyone arbitrarily detained. We condemn the use of torture and summary executions, and we believe there must never be use of the death penalty in any circumstance. We believe that with our partners, we must reconvene this council together with the Security Council. We must mobilize in order to document and find evidence of human rights violations and international crimes committed by the Iranian authorities since the 28th of December 25. We support renewing the mandate of the independent fact-finding missions and the Special Rapporteur. The mission has already collected thousands of pieces of evidence and has the testimonials of victims of human rights violations. There must be an investigation of recent violations committed by the Iranian regime. There must be cooperation with prosecutors in order to establish those responsible. We call for the adoption of the draft resolution. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. With regard to the continued reports of significant loss of life and injuries amongst the protesters in Iran, the Republic of Korea has been closely monitoring the growing instability within the region with concern. It is unquestionable that all individuals are entitled to the full and equal enjoyment of all aspects of human rights, including the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. In light of this, the alleged human rights violations in Iran are of particular concern, including the alarming numbers of civilian casualties, detention of protesters, including children, and ongoing internet shutdown. Against this backdrop, my delegation emphasized that any use of force, particularly lethal force, against peaceful protesters is unacceptable. It is imperative that the grievances of Iran's people be taken seriously, the underlying concerns facing them be properly addressed, and accountability for all alleged human rights violations be ensured. In this regard, while recalling the state's primary responsibility to respect its international human rights obligations, the Republic of Korea notes the importance of engagement with United Nations human rights mechanisms, which can support the implementation of those obligations. My delegation hopes for a peaceful resolution of the current situation in Iran and looks forward to tangible progress in enhancing the human rights situation through constructive cooperation between Iran and the international human rights mechanisms. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Vice President, Switzerland welcomes holding this special session on the alarming human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran in the context of demonstrations which began on the 28th of December last year. Switzerland is deeply concerned by credible information indicating that there's been excessive use of force by security forces, including the use of lethal force. We're also concerned at reports saying that there are arbitrary executions as well as thousands of arrests and arbitrary detentions, including of children. We also note the severe restrictions to freedom of association, assembly and expression worsened by the internet shutdown and communication services, which blocks access to information and essential services. These developments are in flagrant contradiction with the international obligations of Iran, notably the ICCPR, and particularly the primordial respect of the right to life. Any restriction to freedom of expression and freedom of association and peaceful assembly must be provided for in law. They must be necessary and proportional. Switzerland urges the Iranian Authority to immediately put an end to violence, mass arrests and internet shutdowns, and to abstain from imposing the death penalty, including in connection with the demonstrations, and to take specific measures for de-escalation. This includes holding rapid, independent, impartial investigations, the establishment of responsibilities, and full cooperation with UN human rights mechanisms. This is why we support draft resolution S39L1 as submitted for adoption in the special session. Pursuant to its tradition and its mandate, Switzerland will continue to work for dialogue, respect of international law and protection of human dignity. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Mr. Vice President, Egypt is closely monitoring the developments in Iran and reaffirms the HRC's important role in supporting and promoting human rights around the world in a balanced and fair manner based on neutrality, objectivity and non-politicization, thus ensuring the HRC's continued delivery of its mandate efficiently and effectively and regaining the spirit of consensus within it. Egypt reaffirms that the right to peaceful assembly is guaranteed to all based on the determinants and standards stipulated in the ICCPR, and the ultimate responsibility lies with states in promoting human rights and protecting them. We regret the fall of civilian casualties during the recent demonstrations in Iran, and we reaffirm the importance of operationalizing national investigative and accountability mechanisms to hold those responsible accountable. It is our firm position that the creation of HRC mechanisms or expansion of existing mandates must be based on the consent of the country concerned, which strengthens cooperation and dialogue and conduces to providing technical assistance and capacity building to support the countries in fulfilling their obligations in promoting and protecting human rights and responding to their people's aspirations. Our joint efforts are important in rationalizing the HRC's resources, particularly in light of the liquidity crisis, and we insist on the importance of consultations before expanding activities or multiplying existing mechanisms. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Japan believes that universal values such as human rights, freedom, democracy, and the rule of law should be respected in every country. Based on this belief, we supported the holding of this special session. We are deeply concerned about the deterioration of the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran in light of the reports that many people have been killed or injured in the protests. Japan opposes any use of force against peaceful protests and calls upon the Islamic Republic of Iran to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from unnecessary or disproportionate measures. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to uphold the fundamental human rights of its citizens, in particular the right to freedom of expression, including freedom to seek, receive, and impart information, and the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association without fear of reprisal. Japan remains open to dialogue with the Islamic Republic of Iran to further exchange views on efforts to improve its human rights situation, including through a bilateral human rights dialogue. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished ambassador of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Albania expresses its grave concern regarding the serious and ongoing deterioration of the human rights situation in Iran, particularly in the context of the peaceful protests that began in 28 December 2025. We strongly deplore the excessive, disproportionate and lethal use of force against peaceful protesters, resulting in thousands of deaths, mass injuries and the use of firearms and other prohibited means in clear violation of international human rights law. We express our deep concern regarding the widespread arbitrary arrests and detentions, including of children, and the risk of the arbitrary application of the death penalty against recently arrested protesters. Albania reaffirms the right of all Iranians to life, liberty and security of person, as well as their rights to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly. Albania stresses the urgent need to ensure accountability and end impunity for serious human rights violations and all crimes under international law. We strongly support the extension of mandate of the independent international fact-finding mission on Iran, as well as the extension of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. Albania supports the conduct of urgent investigation into recent and ongoing violations, including with a view to future judicial proceedings in accordance with their mandates. Finally, Albania reiterates its support and solidarity with the Iranian people and its aspiration for full respect for their fundamental freedoms and rights, as well as for a better future. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished ambassador of Brazil.
Very much. Mr. Vice President, Brazil is closely following the ongoing human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We strongly condemn the use of lethal force against peaceful protesters, and we are concerned by reports claiming arbitrary arrests and the targeting of children. We note that internet shutdowns violate the right to freedom of expression, including access to information. Brazil calls for maximum restraint and urges the Iranian government to conduct thorough and impartial investigations into all allegations of serious human rights violations. We're also worried about the potential impact on women's rights and freedoms. We encourage Iran to deepen its cooperation with the human rights treaty bodies and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to ensure the universal respect for civil and political rights, as well as to implement measures for reparations and reconciliation, with focus on vulnerable groups such as women, children, youth, and ethnic and religious minorities. Brazil maintains that the Iranian people alone hold the sovereign right to determine their country's future. Finally, Brazil reiterates its condemnation of unilateral, coercive measures against Iran. We underscore that such measures negatively impact the human rights of the population and exacerbate the country's economic challenges, which serve as a backdrop to the current demonstrations. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the fact-finding mission, the Special Rapporteur and Mr. Akavan for their powerful statements today. The Iranian authorities' horrific response has claimed thousands of lives. Many more protesters exercising their rights to freedom of expression and assembly remain detained, their fates unclear. Iran's abhorrent use of the death penalty continues. On average, around 6 people are executed every day in Iran. We do not know the full scale of the violence and killing. The internet blackout imposed on the 8th of January prevented crucial communications and the full documentation of violations. Restrictions remain in place today. We should be clear, the scale of this horrendous killing is shocking, but the authorities' response is not. We all remember previous devastating crackdowns, including in 2009, 2019 and 2022. It's time to end these cycles of repression. It takes true bravery to speak out in the face of an authority prepared to fire at its own people. This is especially true of women and those from religious and ethnic minorities who continue to face severe repression in their daily lives. The Iranian authorities must be held accountable. This is why the fact-finding mission must be renewed today. We stand firmly with the Iranian people in their pursuit of justice. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Thailand.
Thailand has been closely following the developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran and is deeply concerned over this situation. We sincerely hope I'm sorry, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thailand has been closely following developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran and is deeply concerned over the situation. We sincerely hope that the situation will be resolved peacefully, allowing a swift return to calm and normalcy. Thailand expresses its profound sympathy over the reported loss of life and injuries and extends our deepest condolences to the families affected. We emphasize the paramount importance of safeguarding lives, preventing further casualties, and avoiding any further deterioration of the situation. Thailand reaffirms its commitment to the principles of international law and human rights. We underscore the importance of constructive engagement in advancing an environment conducive to the promotion and protection of fundamental rights and freedoms, where stability is preserved through dialogue, restraint, and respect for international law among all relevant stakeholders. In this regard, we support the continued constructive engagement between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Human Rights Council. Lastly, Thailand further reaffirms the fundamental principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, which call for the peaceful resolution through dialogue and mutual respect among states, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity as the bedrock of peace and security. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Cyprus, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Cyprus aligns itself with the EU statement. The most recent wave of mass, peaceful protests in the Islamic Republic of Iran and their brutal repression raises very grave concerns regarding the Iranian authorities' respect for fundamental rights. Cyprus recalls Iran's obligations under international human rights law to respect the rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. We note with alarm reports of thousands of deaths and injuries, arbitrary and incommunicado arrests, and severe repression across the country, including through indiscriminate and excessive use of force. Cyprus urges the Iranian authorities to ensure the prompt release of all individuals arbitrarily detained and to exercise maximum restraint in the use of force. Cyprus is particularly concerned about the reported use of the death penalty and other harsh punishments against recently detained individuals. We urge the Iranian authorities to suspend all executions. Cyprus strongly condemns restrictions on freedom of opinion and expression offline and online and calls for the immediate lifting of the nationwide internet blackout as well as the immediate restoration of communications. In this context, we reiterate our full support for the mandates of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission and the Special Rapporteur. Their work remains indispensable in establishing facts, preserving evidence, and providing an objective assessment of Iran's compliance with its international human rights obligations. Ensuring justice and accountability for the gross violations of recent weeks is essential so as to address the long-standing pattern of impunity documented by the fact-finding mission. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on China.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. China has carefully listened to the statement of Iran and those of all other parties and has taken note of the efforts made by the Iranian government to address issue and information provided by the Iranian government. China's position on human rights is consistent and clear. China upholds the right of all countries to independently choose their own paths of human rights development, oppose interference in other countries' internal affairs under pretext of human rights, oppose the imposition of country-specific HR mechanism without the consent of the country concerned, oppose double standards on human rights. Based on the above position, China does not support the convening of the special session of the Human Rights Council. The situation within Iran is in essence a matter of internal affairs and should be decided upon by the Iranian people themselves. China consistently advocates for adherence to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law, opposes the use and threat of force in international relations, opposes imposing one's own will on others, and opposes the return of the world to the law of the jungle. On the basis of respect of Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity, the international community should support the Iranian government and its people in overcoming difficulties, maintaining national stability, and safeguarding their legitimate rights and interests. China is of the view, we hope, that all parties should resolve differences through dialogue and is ready to play China's constructive role to this end. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. South Africa reiterates its commitment to multilateralism and stands for the firm adherence to international rule of law. South Africa believes that the right to peaceful protest, freedom of expression, and freedom of association are universal rights that must be upheld and protected as enshrined in international human rights law. In this regard, all efforts must be expended to ensure the protection of the right to life, which remains sacrosanct. We are disturbed by the reports of violence, including the death and destruction of property during the demonstrations, and express our solidarity and condolences for the tragic loss of life. Thus, death should be investigated promptly and violators must be held accountable. We are concerned at reports that show that there has been direct interference by external actors to sow divisions and deepen instability in Iran. To this end, we support the call for an independent inquiry that will ascertain the breaches of human rights by all. Furthermore, South Africa calls on the Iranian authorities to ensure that any action taken must accord with the principle of legality, necessity, proportionality, and precaution. We therefore urge maximum restraint. Mr. Vice President, the grievances of the Iranian people need to be heard and addressed, and not instrumentalized by anyone, as the High Commissioner articulated in his statement of 13 January this year, a point the resolution regrettably does not take into account. We need to adhere to the rules that we have collectively agreed to that govern our work. In this context of the Human Rights Council, we have agreed through the Resolution 5/1, paragraph 60, that country mandate periods will be 1 year. Yet the draft resolution before us conflicts with this decision. This deviation is of a major concern to my delegation. Mr. Vice President, all member states must adhere to the United Nations Charter, which mandates them to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. These developments only serve to fuel instability, which is of no benefit to the Iranian people, nor to the security of the region or the world. A sustainable peace can only be achieved through solutions that center dialogue and the agency of the Iranian people. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ghana welcomes convening this special session and appreciates the briefing provided by the High Commissioner and the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We have closely followed with concern reports emerging from the Islamic Republic of Iran following the protests that began on 28 December 2025, including the tragic loss of lives. These are indeed troubling and requires our Council's rapt attention as we collectively seek a path towards calm and restoration. My delegation wishes to reaffirm that the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression are fundamental human rights protected under international law. We further note that security responses to public demonstration must always be lawful, proportionate, and respectful of human dignity. We emphasize the responsibility of all states to ensure the protection of civilians and to prevent actions that could stoke tensions or deepen mistrust between civilians and authorities. We also underscore the importance of dialogue and engagement as the most sustainable path to addressing grievances. We encourage the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran to pursue transparent national processes, including independent investigations where appropriate, and to cooperate constructively with relevant international human rights mechanisms. Mr. Vice President, my delegation finally urges the Council to approach this situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran with fairness, objectivity, and consistency. Our collective goal should be the protection of human rights and not the deepening of divisions. In conclusion, Ghana stands ready to support efforts that promote de-escalation, accountability, and constructive engagement in line with the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Pakistan.
President, Pakistan will always be a friend to Iran and Iranian people everywhere. Iran was the first country to recognize Pakistan's independence. Regardless of domestic or regional developments, the two peoples have always enjoyed strong bonds of friendship rooted in shared culture, history, and faith. Recent developments in Iran were therefore of great concern to Pakistan. All life is sacred. The deaths of first responders, medical staff, policemen, protesters, and bystanders are tragic and deeply regrettable. Rioting, arson, and attacks on government offices, places of worship, and elsewhere are very unsettling. International human rights law recognizes public safety and order as essential for the enjoyment of human rights. Pakistan welcomes the cessation of violence and the gradual return to normalcy in Iran. We also note Iran's commitment to uphold the due process of law. The protests cannot be separated from the context of the tragic loss of life and destruction that the people of Iran suffered as the result of a regional aggressor's unlawful military strikes last June. Maintaining peace and stability remains the best safeguard for the human rights of the people in Iran and across the region. This debate can also not overlook the adverse human rights impact of unilateral sanctions as aggravating factors underlying the protests. The High Commissioner and Special Procedures have repeatedly warned that these measures affect the dignity and rights of all Iranians. They also constrain the Iranian government's ability to uphold all human rights. Mr. Vice President, the Council must consider what the special session is expected to achieve. Sanctions, military actions, and interference have only caused suffering in Iran. The value of imposed mandates without the consent of Iran remains dubious. The situation of human rights is improved only with time-tested instruments of dialogue and cooperation. Geopolitical considerations must never outweigh the imperative for diplomacy and engagement. We invite the sponsors of this session to reflect. Confrontation only reduces space for genuine dialogue. It exposes the Council's universal mandate to charges of selectivity, and it does a disservice to the human rights of the people in Iran. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Colombia.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Vice President. It's since 1928 where workers in our country were killed by the army during a strike related to a fruit country. This was known as the Banana Massacre, and it is a grave shame in our recent history. We looked also to the events of 2021. These episodes had a serious impact on human rights, with a loss of life, injuries, restrictions on freedom of expression and assembly, enforced disappearances, arbitrary disappearances. Following this painful episode, Colombia recognized peaceful coexistence as crucial for democracy and citizens' participation. It took us many years to achieve that, but it's better late than never. States must protect peaceful protest and make it possible, not suppress it. The use of force, we learned, cannot be the response to social movements calling for fundamental rights. Our suffering taught us that the use of force in international relations is only harmful to human rights. From our own experience, with humility and respect, we urge the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran to cooperate with the universal human rights system and allow the necessary support to be provided so that the population may live in peace, including students, young people, women, so that they may be heard and their rights respected. We also urge it to stop the repression of peaceful demonstrations, free the people arbitrarily detained, and investigate effectively the human rights violations that have taken place in the context of the protests. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Ambassador of Cuba.
Señor
Vice President, in recent weeks, many countries, the High Commissioner and mandate holders have pointed to serious violations of the UN Charter, international law, and human rights committed by the government of the USA with its brutal military aggression against Venezuela. However, the response of this Council has been absolute silence. There has been no special session called to consider these grave events. Only a few voices have spoken in this room to call for accountability, to reject the unacceptable, dangerous behavior of the USA. However, in the case of the Islamic Republic of Iran, we immediately see a special session with preparation of a resolution condemning it for increasing periods of time with not just one, but two parallel mechanisms of monitoring. We're not surprised. Unfortunately, this pattern of double standards is happening over and over in this Council. Cuba categorically rejects all forms of foreign intervention in Iran or any other country. We are opposed to any attempt to use the internal situation of any country for geopolitical agendas. We call for an end to the unilateral coercive measures against Iran and against those other countries that are suffering those. We denounce the imposition of interventionist mandates, which are always against developing countries. We will continue to defend dialogue and cooperation as the only effective way to promote human rights. I thank you, Ambassador.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra.
Thank you. I call on the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands welcomes the convening of this special session, aligns itself with the statement of the European Union, and wishes to make 3 points. First, we call upon Iran to cease resorting to the use of lethal force and repression against protesters. Second, we urge Iran to ensure due process, to release all those who have been arbitrarily detained, and to refrain from applying the death penalty, particularly in light of the record number of executions carried out in 2025. Third, we call on Iran to uphold the human rights obligations, such as the freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly, and to ensure the free flow of information, including full and unrestricted access to the Internet. Mr. Vice President, in light of these concerns, the Kingdom of the Netherlands supports the renewal of the mandate of the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur on Iran, as well as the call for an urgent and independent investigation into recent developments. These steps are essential to ensure accountability for the human rights violations committed in the past weeks and to deliver justice for those who were killed, injured or arbitrarily detained solely for exercising their fundamental rights and expressing legitimate demands. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully cooperate with both the Special Rapporteur and the fact-finding mission. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished delegation of Angola.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The government of the Republic of Angola reaffirms its strong commitment to promoting and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and relevant international human rights instruments. In this context, the Angolan authorities reiterate its commitment to promoting and protecting human rights advocating constructive dialogue and the importance of technical assistance in human rights matters. We also reaffirm our rejection of politicization of human rights and the selectivity of special mechanisms, while emphasizing the need for international cooperation on human rights and respect for the sovereignty of states in line with the various United Nations instruments in this subject. We strongly believe that dialogue, inclusivity and genuine engagement among all stakeholders are the most effective means of preventing polarization and promoting sustainable long-term solutions. The Angolan delegation remains committed to constructive dialogue within the Human Rights Council to strengthen the credibility, objectivity and the universality of the international human rights system. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I call on Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ethiopia reiterates its long-standing commitment to the promotion and the protection of human rights through constructive dialogue, cooperation and mutual respect among member states. We firmly believe that the advancement of human rights is best achieved in an environment free from politicization, selectivity and double standards. With regard to the situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ethiopia underscores the fundamental principle that the primary responsibility for the protection and promotion of human rights rests with governments themselves in accordance with their constitutional, legal, and institutional frameworks and the will of their people. We emphasize the importance of upholding democratic rights and freedoms, including through inclusive national processes and dialogue, while fully respecting the principle of sovereignty and non-interference as enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Domestic challenges, including those related to public order and social unrest, should be addressed through national mechanisms in a peaceful and lawful means. Ethiopia expresses concern over external approaches that seek to interfere in internal affairs or instrumentalize political movements against sovereign states. As such actions risk exacerbating tensions, undermining stability, and weakening national ownership of reform efforts. We stress that the Human Rights Council should serve as a platform for cooperation and dialogue, rather than confrontation. In this regard, Ethiopia encourages continued engagement with the international human rights mechanisms based on mutual respect, impartiality, and consent. In conclusion, Ethiopia calls upon all parties to uphold the principles of the United Nations Charter, respect sovereignty, and refrain from interference, and support peaceful and nationally driven solutions. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Bulgaria.
Mr. President, Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. Bulgaria is deeply concerned by the gravity of the situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran following the recent unprecedented crackdown of peaceful protests by the authorities. We are deeply concerned by the use of lethal weapons by security forces, which has led to the death of thousands of protesters and a high number of injured protesters. We denounce the widespread arbitrary arrests and detentions of participants in the protests. We are alarmed that the Iranian authorities have imposed a nationwide internet shutdown and communication blackout, affecting Iranians' right to freedom of expression and access to information, disrupting emergency and life-saving services. Bulgaria urges for the investigation of all killings, violence against protesters and other serious human rights violations and abuses in line with international human rights norms and standards. Those officials who are responsible for those human rights violations and abuses must be held to account. We call on the Iranian authorities to fulfill their country's obligations under international human rights law, to respect the rights to freedom of expression association and peaceful assembly of individuals and their right to free flow of information. Bulgaria confirms its support to the independent international fact-finding mission and expects it, in line with its mandate, to thoroughly investigate all allegations of serious human rights violations and abuses perpetrated in relation to the protests that began on 28th of December 2025, including for potential future legal proceedings. We will support the extension of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur while being confident that she will closely monitor the current human rights situation, including the respect for and protection of civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights in Iran. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished ambassador of Chile.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Chile welcomes the holding of this special session, given the violent repression and serious human rights violations committed in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We roundly condemn the deaths, the violence against demonstrators, and the excessive and disproportionate use of force by state officials in the context of peaceful protests that began on the 28th of December 2025. We also reject the blocking and restriction of communications, including the internet shutdown and the banning of mobile phones. These actions have led to thousands of deaths, according to current estimates, and there have been large-scale violations, torture, arbitrary executions, disappearances. We call for the upholding of rights, for freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and we believe Iranian citizens have the right to fully participate in public affairs in line with international human rights law. The recent events, Vice President, in Iran should be added to the very serious acts committed in 2022 and 23, when peaceful demonstrators were harassed, detained, and this disproportionately affected women and children. In addition to this, the acts of since December 2025 testify to systematic repression of peaceful demonstration. We therefore launch an appeal to the authorities of Iran to put an end to the repression of peaceful protests and to guarantee the full respect of fundamental rights. We firmly underline the need to carry out impartial, transparent, independent investigations, which will allow for proper accountability and access to justice, as well as comprehensive reparations for the victims of state action. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Italy aligns itself with the European Union statement and wishes to add the following in its national capacity. We express our deepest concern over the violent repression of protests in the Islamic Republic of Iran and the reported severe human rights violations across the country. We strongly condemn the excessive and lethal use of force by security forces against demonstrators who were legitimately exercising their fundamental rights to freedom of expression, associations, and peaceful assembly. Reports of thousands of deaths, widespread arbitrary arrests, and serious ill treatment of detainees are deeply alarming and unacceptable. Italy unequivocally condemns the indiscriminate use of the death penalty as a means to suppress protest and silence dissent. Public statements by Iranian judicial authorities suggesting expedited trials and the possible imposition of capital punishments against protesters constitute a grave violation of Iranians' international human rights obligations and a direct assault on human dignity. Italy reiterates its firm opposition to the death penalty at all times and in all circumstances and urges the Iranian authorities to halt immediately all executions as a first step towards a more general moratorium. We echo the call of the United Nations High Commissioners for Human Rights for an immediate end to violence and repressions, as well as for the full restoration of Internet and telecommunication services. Internet shutdowns undermine fundamental freedoms, hinder independent monitoring, and exacerbate the suffering of the population. Italy urges Iranian authorities to release all those arbitrarily detained and ensure accountability for human rights violations committed in the context of the repression. In this regard, Italy strongly supports the mandates of the Special Rapporteur in Iran and the fact-finding mission, and calls on Iranian authorities to fully cooperate with those mechanisms and start an open and democratic dialogue with the protesters. Italy stands in solidarity with the Iranian people and their legitimate aspirations for freedom, dignity and justice. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador, Ambassador of Ecuador. Vice President, Ecuador agreed with those who called for the holding of a special session on the worsening human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran in the context of national protests, recognizing that we are faced with a situation which requires the attention of Council. The broad support for holding this session is a very clear signal that such situations must be discussed in the main United Nations body with competency in the field of human rights. My country expresses its deep concern and condemnation for the very serious events that have been reported in Iran since the 28th of December 2025, which have been reported by the Office of the High Commissioner and various special procedures. They testify to violence and repression exercised by state security forces against demonstrators, resulting in arbitrary detentions, people wounded, many thousands dead, including children. For these reasons, Ecuador rejects any act of violence against the civilian population and any measures which limit the exercise of human rights, including freedom of expression, of association, and of peaceful assembly. My delegation emphasizes the importance of ensuring that civil society, human rights defenders, journalists, and communication media must have a safe working environment, and there must be safe and free access to the internet. Vice President, Ecuador restates the importance of respecting the principles and standards of international law enshrined in the UN Charter. And we call on the authorities of Iran, as others have, to undertake a genuine dialogue and constructive cooperation with the independent international fact-finding mission, the Special Rapporteur, and other UN bodies in order to reduce tension, bring about independent investigations, ensure accountability, and protect dignity of all persons. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished ambassador of the Dominican Republic. Thank you, Vice President. The Dominican Republic supports the holding of this special session of the Human Rights Council, and we share the concern of the international community when faced with recent information on developments in the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is up to this Council to heed situations that generate such global concern, particularly when there are allegations of excessive use of force, arbitrary detention, and restrictions to fundamental freedoms in all contexts, particularly when there is protest. We take note of the reports submitted by the competent international bodies describing situations which violate the human rights of civilian population. These must be carefully and objectively analysed pursuant to international human rights standards and the mandate of this Council. We state once again that accountability, the respect of the rule of law, and due process are essential to ensure effective protection of human rights and to strengthen the confidence and trust between the authorities and the population. We emphasise the importance of dialogue, technical cooperation and multilateralism in order to move towards sustainable solutions, making sure that there is space for constructive exchange, contributing trust and promoting gradual and lasting progress. We would therefore urge the Iranian authorities to strengthen their cooperation with international human rights mechanisms. We say once again that we are willing to support the efforts of Council in order to tackle this situation in a constructive manner and one which looks for specific solutions. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the Ambassador of the Czech Republic.
Mr. Vice President, we remain deeply concerned by the persistent repression of protests by the Iranian authorities against their armed population. Since late December 2025, people across Iran have peacefully expressed their legitimate aspirations for fundamental freedoms and improved living conditions. We are alarmed by the reports of numerous deaths and injuries among protesters. We strongly condemn the use of excessive and lethal force by security forces, as well as widespread arbitrary arrests, detention, intimidation, and judicial harassment. Such actions constitute serious violations of international human rights law, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Iran is a state party. We call on the Iranian authorities to immediately cease all violent actions against peaceful protesters and to fully respect the rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association. All individuals detained solely for exercising these fundamental rights must be released without delay, and due process guarantees must be upheld in all cases. We urge Iran to ensure full, safe and unhindered access to information and communications, including by refraining from internet shutdowns. We call on the Iranian authorities to intensify surveillance and the ongoing persecution of lawyers, journalists, social media users and human rights defenders, both within Iran and through acts of repression abroad. We reiterate our principled opposition to the use of the death penalty in all circumstances and call on the Iranian authorities to stop the executions. We reaffirm our solidarity with the Iranian people and express our full support for civil society actors and human rights defenders who, despite severe pressure and significant risk, play a crucial role in documenting violations, promoting human rights, and sharing information with the international community. Finally, we call on Iran to ensure accountability for all violations and grant unhindered access and full cooperation to the UN fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished Ambassador of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Kenya acknowledges the convening of this special session, particularly amid the recent nationwide protests backed by economic grievances in Tehran's bazaar since late December 2025. We view today's discussion as a vital affirmation of our shared responsibility to tackle urgent human rights challenges through principled multilateral dialogue, fostering cooperation in a deeply polarized geopolitical landscape. These bedrock principles demand consistent, impartial application across all contexts and regions, free from selectivity or politicization, to uphold this Council's integrity in addressing global crisis. Kenya shares concerns over allegations of human rights violations arising from these events, including allegations of excessive use of force and restrictions on freedoms. We recognize the contributing factors characterizing these protests, rooted in pressing economic hardships and aspirations for improved governance, which warrant thoughtful, constructive responses from the Iranian government. We equally acknowledge positive steps already taken by Iran, including its repeated invitations for dialogue, commitments to investigative allegations transparently, and engagement with the national partners as conveyed in statement to this Council and beyond. At the same time, the rights to peaceful assembly, expression, and association impose reciprocal duties on individuals to exercise them lawfully, peacefully, while states retain their sovereign prerogative and international law to apply proportionate restrictions safeguarding public order and national security. Mr. Vice President, all human rights mechanisms must prioritize cooperative avenues that respect sovereignty and interference, while underscoring that their mandates are most effective while the full consent and cooperation of the states concerned. In this spirit, Kenya encourages Iran to pursue further confidence-building measures, ensuring due processes for all detainees, reviewing crowd control practices and use of force to align with best practices and enhance its engagement with UN mechanisms and partners. We believe that inclusive dialogue would exemplify Iran's commitment to accountability, mutual trust, and balanced principled path this Council exists to promote. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the report submitted by the High Commissioner and the Special Rapporteur and the President of the Independent Fact-Finding Commission. Bolivia reaffirms its commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights and the free exercise of fundamental freedoms by all persons, and the obligation of states to guarantee these. In any situation, the right to life and the respect of human rights and the peaceful settlement of disputes must prevail, and this is in line with the UN Charter. We call for avoiding confrontation, and through transparent proceedings, the perpetrators of any acts of violence or human rights violations must be held accountable in line with international standards. We believe that all international stakeholders must tackle such situations with diplomacy in line with international law and avoid any act that might lead to an escalation of the situation. At the same time, we must ensure there is consistency in all mechanisms, balancing costs and effective results and avoiding duplication. We hope that all parties will be able to resume dialogue and negotiation, de-escalate tension, settle differences in a climate of mutual respect, and also meet the legitimate aspirations of the peoples. Thank you. Thank you. We can now move on to the list of speakers, of observers of the Council. I give the floor in the first instance to the distinguished representative of Germany, Secretary of State Bernhard Korsch.
Mr. President, once again this Council convenes to address human rights violations in Iran. Once again, peaceful protesters standing up for their inviolable rights have been violently attacked, arbitrarily arrested or killed. We have all listened to the statements of the High Commissioner, the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur. Germany thanks all Member States for coming together for this special session. Today, let us send a strong, united signal of solidarity with those suffering human rights abuses in Iran, those standing up for their rights. Today, we want to shed light on human rights violations that Iran is trying to hide behind an internet blackout. Germany commends the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur for their tireless efforts to document and investigate abuses and to improve the human rights situation. We call on the Iranian government to cooperate fully with these mandates. The tragic events of the past weeks and the reporting today underline once more why we need both the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur. We call on this Council to join us in extending both mandates to ensure that their crucial work for human rights and accountability can continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Luxembourg that will be making a video statement. Thank you, Vice President. Luxembourg aligns itself with the declaration of the EU, and we reiterate our support to the Iranian people. We firmly condemn the violent repression of demonstrations in Iran. We are alarmed by the reports and the images showing that there are countless deaths, thousands wounded, and mass arbitrary arrests. Many Iranian men and women are disappeared. We are very much affected by the loss of life in Iran, including that of children, and our thoughts are with their families. Human rights, including the right to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly, must be respected and protected at all times. Iran must respect them and fully guarantee such rights. We are bringing today the voice of Iranian men and women, and it is up to them to decide how they would like to shape their future. Access to the media and to independent information, including comprehensive access to the internet, is essential. We renew our appeal to the leaders of the Islamic Republic to abolish the death penalty, to put an end to the cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, and to free all political prisoners. Transparent and independent investigations must immediately be launched in order to bring the perpetrators of such crimes to justice. Along these lines, we support extending the mandate of the independent fact-finding mission. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Distinguished Ambassador of Ireland.
Thank you, Vice President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU. The events in Iran serve as a shocking reminder of how the Iranian regime treats its own people. Ireland condemns the brutal repression, killing and imprisonment of protesters exercising the fundamental rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly.
Apologies, I must interrupt you. There's a point of order.
President, the use of undefined and non-standard term of calling other countries shows the malintention of the Speaker to lead the Council's direction toward their political aims. Mr. President, with the aim of preserving the true dignity of human rights, respecting the status of countries and preventing the further politicization of the Council, I request you not to allow using the not correct languages calling my country. The name of my country is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would remind all speakers of the need to use a standard language which is approved by the United Nations. So please do continue with your statement, Ireland.
Thank you, Vice President. Thank you, Vice President. I'll continue. Ireland condemns the brutal repression, killing and imprisonment of protesters exercising the fundamental rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. We reject the characterisation of peaceful protesters as domestic terrorists, and we condemn recourse to the use of executions. Verified information is limited by the deliberate choice of the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran to prevent their actions being observed and reported. However, it is clear that massive human rights violations have occurred, including the killing of civilians and many instances of unprovoked and indiscriminate attacks against protesters using lethal force, including the use of automatic weapons. The freedom to seek, receive and impart information must be upheld as an undisputed right. The people of Iran must have full access to telephone and internet services. We call on the Islamic Republic of Iran to cease all violent actions against civilians, suspend executions, to restore communication services and to engage meaningfully with the concerns and demands expressed by so many people across the country. Ireland hopes that today's special session can ensure that events surrounding the protests and the overall human rights situation in the country can be clearly investigated and the perpetrators held accountable. The international community must hold the Islamic Republic of Iran to its obligations to protect and ensure the fundamental rights of its people. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ukraine aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. We strongly condemn the repression of the Iranian authorities against their own people, including the unprecedented increase in death and injuries among protesters. This is a gross violation of fundamental human rights and freedoms. We underline the crucial role of the FFMI and Special Rapporteur on documenting violations. We call on the Iranian authorities to abandon forceful methods, respect the rights of citizens to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, and fulfill the legitimate demands of their own people. Violence against defenseless protesters must be stopped immediately. Mr. Vice President, Iran's support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and its oppression of its own citizens are part of the same policy, a policy of violence and disregard for human beings.
I'm afraid there's another point of order. The delegation of Iran, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm sorry that I'm requesting the second time point of order. The content presented by the current speaker is inaccurate, irrelevant to the subject of this meeting, and intended to involve another country in a matter to which it has not connection. I respectfully request that you prevent the raising of such irrelevant and unfounded issues. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Thank you. I would like to ask the delegate of Ukraine to continue their statement.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Iranian people deserve to have their fundamental civic rights protected, including access to information and freedom of assembly. They deserve a normal life, free of fear, a life with freedom, safety, and prosperity. We reiterate our call on the international community to increase political, diplomatic, and other pressure on Tehran in response to violence and oppression. Ukraine stands in solidarity with the people of Iran. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. Belarus considers the special session to be another attempt by a group of states to use the Council's mechanisms to put pressure on Iran's authorities. The draft resolution effectively promotes intervention in internal affairs, and the initiators of the resolution are using sanctions against Iran, harming its economy and undermine the economic and social rights of the people. That group of countries is carrying out unlawful extremist activity to destabilize the situation towards an unconstitutional change of power. We have seen similar scenarios, and we know the results. The loss of statehood, the harm to the economy, and the impoverishment of the population. We condemn such policies against Iran, as well as the politicized decisions in the Council, and we hope that the people and the authorities of Iran, through dialogue and cooperation, can overcome this situation and ensure justice, equality, peace, and human rights. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Vice President. Australia welcomes this special session to address the deteriorating human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran and supports the renewal of the mandate of the fact-finding mission in Iran and the Special Rapporteur on Iran. Australia unequivocally condemns the Iranian government's brutal violence against its own people. We urge Iran to immediately end its killing of protesters, arbitrary arrests, telecommunications blackouts and intimidation tactics. We are appalled by reports that Iran has used the death penalty against protesters. Iran's actions continue its record of excessive, often lethal force against protesters, human rights activists, journalists and political opponents, and its long-standing oppression of women, ethnic and religious minorities and LGBTQI+ persons. Contrary to Iran's disinformation, these protests are not a foreign conspiracy. They are real voices of the Iranian people. We stand with the protesters in their struggle for human rights, livelihoods and fundamental freedoms. We call on Iran to ensure the rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly without fear of reprisal. All violations must be independently investigated and perpetrators held accountable and brought to justice. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Austria aligns with the EU statement. We stand in full solidarity with the Iranian people in exercising the rights of freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Austria is deeply concerned about the shockingly high number of deaths among protesters and the disproportionate use of force by Iranian security forces against peaceful demonstrators. We strongly condemn the arbitrary arrests and threats of execution against those detained for exercising their rights and urge the Iranian authorities to end all forms of arbitrary detention and mistreatment in custody. All individuals imprisoned for freedom of expression and peaceful protest must be released immediately. We particularly condemn the use of force against children and the arbitrary arrest and detention of minors in connection with the protests and call for their immediate release. Austria also condemns the nationwide internet shutdown imposed by Iranian authorities and calls for the immediate restoration of internet access and communication systems. This Council cannot remain silent in the face of the deteriorating human rights situation. We owe the Iranian people a thorough, independent and objective investigation into all human rights violations related to the protests. Perpetrators of violence must be held accountable. We call on the Iranian government to fully cooperate with the fact-finding mission in its investigation. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra la distinguida.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thank you, Vice President. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reaffirmed its solidarity with the people and government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, profoundly regretting the loss of human life following violent protests that were financed, armed, technologically supported and encouraged by foreign actors. Venezuela strenuously rejects selectivity, double standards and instrumentalization of human rights for geopolitical purposes and expresses its profound concern at the use of this council as a tool of pressure against sovereign states. Self-determination of Iran should be respected. We regret that this special session has been convened on the basis of piecemeal narratives that intentionally ignore the causes and distort the reality of the facts. The external threats against the leaders of the legitimate government of Iran and against people victim of UCMs have been public, notorious and performative. The ultimate goal is to apply the deleterious policy of regime change to appropriate their natural resources. There's no hiding the pretension to end with international public law and the threats to global peace, sovereignty of states and immunity of heads of state and government. We do wonder, will this council continue to be used as a sounding box for the imperial powers who direct us towards barbarities such as the genocide that is taking place in Gaza? Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Paraguay. Vice President, Paraguay condemns the repressions carried out by the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran against their own people in the context of the recent social protests, the deliberate, disproportionate use of force by security forces, including firing on protesters, mass arbitrary detention, and an alarming high number of people perishing and arrested, is a grave violation of human rights by the Iranian state. Paraguay categorically repudiates the restrictions imposed on access to internet and communications. Considering such measures seek to hide the situation, silence civil society and hinder international scrutiny. It's unacceptable the criminalization of social protests and the threat of use of death penalty against protesters, practice that reflect an unacceptable setback and question the international responsibility of the state. We urge the Iranian authorities to immediately cease all forms of violence against the civilian population, to release all persons detained for peacefully exercising their fundamental rights, restoring fully digital freedoms and calling for full unrestricted cooperation with the fact-finding mission. Finally, Paraguay reaffirms its firm conviction that there be no stability, development and legitimacy without respect for human rights, and this Council is duty-bound morally and legally to promote accountability, prevent impunity and support the legitimate aspirations of the Iranian people. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We align ourselves with the EU statement. Belgium unequivocally condemns the unprecedented violence perpetrated by the Iranian government against its own citizens. Credible estimates are pointing towards thousands of deaths. We are horrified by these killings. The violent repression against Iranians voicing their legitimate and democratic aspirations must stop. The authorities must exercise utmost restraint and adhere to their international obligations. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully uphold the right to life, liberty and security of person and the right to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly. The immediate restoration of full internet access is imperative in this regard, as is the immediate release of all individuals arbitrarily detained. We are deeply worried by reports regarding rushed trials and possible protest-related executions. At the same time, Iranian authorities are obliged to conduct prompt, effective, independent, transparent and impartial investigations into the grave violations that occurred. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully cooperate with UN entities, particularly the Special Rapporteur and the FFM. We support the renewal of their mandates as well as the request for an urgent inquiry into current events. In conclusion, the legitimate and democratic aspirations of the Iranian people must prevail as much as the respect for international law. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Oman.
Shukran, sir. Thank you, Vice President. Oman reiterates its support to the work of the Human Rights Council, all its mechanisms, as an international framework to address human rights issues through cooperation, responsible dialogue, and exchange of expertise. We reiterate that the effectiveness of the Council is contingent on an approach that respects the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and promotes confidence among states and addresses human rights issues in an objective and balanced fashion. In this respect, Oman believes that respect of the sovereignty and unity of states, as well as a commitment to the principle of non-interference in their domestic affairs, constitute a crucial basis for a stable international order, and they are the genuine guarantee for non-politicization of human rights issues or manipulating them outside their noble purposes. And therefore, Oman believes that the basic objective of the Human Rights Council mechanisms, including the mandate of the Special Rapporteur, is to prepare reports in a professional manner and in an objective, independent, and neutral manner as well, because these are basic elements to safeguard the credibility of the Council as well as its standing as an international forum for balanced dialogue as well as cooperation. Thank you.